Lighting a fire in a lizard. Here's a look at the Hiya Toys Stylist series, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Burning Godzilla. The most famous monster in the world, Godzilla, is now a special color version coming to Hiya Toys. The Stylist series is a non-movable figure series with high-quality detail. The Godzilla 2023 New Year exclusive, based on Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019, features special red paint on a clear body, stands at 7.7 inches tall, and has a powerful pose that holds expressive detail. While some may say that the King of the Monsters is looking rather lit, before we get actually to measuring off this guy, I'd like to thank first the folks over at, of course, Hiya Toys that did provide this sample early that we could have a look at of the brand new 2023 New Year exclusive Stylist series, Burning Godzilla. That's going to make for a rather long title. One thing I can also throw out here as well as I'm about to measure this guy is he's slated to release the second quarter of 2023, and the price point of this guy is going to be $49.99, so he's just shy of being $50 in price. Now, of course, when it comes to measuring this guy, I'm not going to measure to the top of his head. Instead, rather, I'm going to measure to this highest spike. And like in the read-up at the beginning of this review, the statue of Godzilla stands about 7.7 inches in height. And that works out to be a statue that's about 19.5 centimeters tall. As for the end of its nose to the end of its tail, of course we want to measure that off as well. From doing both, you can see that as well the Godzilla Burning Godzilla Stylist series is 11 inches in length, or it's going to be about 29 centimeters long. And while one may be a statue, the other being a figure, I'm going to turn this one sideways, and I'm going to bring in the Godzilla vs. Kong articulated. This was the exquisite basic Godzilla. Now, while obviously the one in the foreground here is going to be the one that's going to be the more articulated, we've already had a look at that. We've covered the review of him in an earlier video. But the one in the back, the one that we're about to have a look at, though he is missing all the articulation points that really did make the one in the foreground so much cooler, I will say the one in the back is a lot bigger of a statue when you do compare the two. And just to pick up Godzilla here for a second, I'm going to spin around the Burning Godzilla. I'm going to bring back in the original one that we looked at, just again to show you guys the size difference. And speaking of Godzilla versus Kong, after all, here's also what the figure looks like, the statue looks like, with the exquisite basic Godzilla versus Kong King Kong. So you can see the one in the middle is bigger than the ones on both bookend on either side of it. FYI, or FWI if you prefer something a little shorter, the Burning Godzilla does require a little bit of assembly when you get it out of the box. In fact, the only assembly that was required, as many of you already know, is the fact that the tail is something that comes separately, and just simply take the end peg here, very large shaped, it almost looks like a continent, and just basically lodge it inside the back of its body. Now, honestly, one thing I will say though is putting the tail in, it never really feels like it's completely all the way in there. I mean, again, any bit of pressure that I try to put, first of all, there is a designated shape. So if you think to yourself, oh, I'm just going to simply twist it. No, you can't do that. Putting it in, again, it doesn't look like it sits in all the way. I suppose if you aren't going to be picking up the statue and moving it around too often, you won't have to worry about the tail falling off. But it does leave, I noticed, a little bit of space with the rest of the body, of course, of Godzilla, and then the end trail tail being something, of course, that does look like it's separate from the rest of the figure's body, statue's body. Other than that, though, that's the only assembly that is actually required to it. It is pre-posed, so if your hope is to get into this and start collecting these and be able to pose these in a different way than I've got them posed right now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Burning Godzilla, the Stylist series as a whole, is a subcategory of Hiya Toys where they're producing statues, not necessarily articulated figures. So while you may not be getting one that you can actually move around, I think what you're getting instead, though, is the benefit of really neat posed Godzilla, in this case with a Burning Godzilla skin tone. The neat thing about this one is it looks charred. In fact, if I could best describe this, it sort of looks like magma as it's starting to cool. If you've ever seen a volcano erupt and then you look at the lava, you sort of see like underneath the little cracks of things still glowing, little embers underneath. But then you see on the surface where it starts to cool and you sort of see like the magma starting to develop this crusty sort of rock face. In this case, you actually get this nice little black crust that's along the skin surface of Godzilla. Certainly when it comes to his head sculpt, overall, really nice looking head. Not only do you get that charred look for his skin, but inside his mouth, you get a nice opportunity to, again, get all this nice warmer colors that make up mostly of the colors that he gets actually here for the spikes that run all the way down the side of his spine. But here in the middle, though, you get also all that same sort of use of color. So you get the oranges, you get the yellows, really nicely handled here. it's all being done on a translucent plastic. So in some of the cases, like the mouth, for example, you kind of see a little bit of that clear plastic peeking its way through. You see as well some nice sculpted, what almost looks to be teeth on the top, well, top jaw, I should say, of Godzilla. And they've also painted the eyes. The only thing I would say, though, about the eyes is far enough away, it does give it a sort of a glowing look, but it's hard to kind of distinguish the pupils from the rest of the sockets of the eyes. The eyeball and the eye and the pupil sort of just kind of get lost together. I wish that they could have taken that light yellow that they've already used right now and even brighten that even further, by maybe even making that lighter yellow being a white instead, so that those eyes really popped a lot more than what they actually did. Now, talking a little bit about the fact that this is using clear plastic probably would be easiest to show you. I guess it probably could show you also on the under pads of his feet, how they're making use of a clear plastic. It isn't so much, I would say, clear plastic, because if you look at the tail itself, just to hold this up to the studio light so you guys can see this, it looks, I would say, less like clear plastic and almost more of a tinted plastic, almost the color of a really diluted iced tea. I like my iced tea a little bit stronger than that. So it's not even quite a clear plastic, sort of more of an off yellowish plastic. And speaking of yellowed plastic, while the majority of its body is sort of making use again of these really nice rusted reds and all this charred black that they painted across the surface of his skin, it also carries nicely here on the undercarriage. If you look under the hood, so to speak, of Godzilla, you kind of get that same sort of color scheme, all working really well for a very nicely delivered Godzilla. The only thing I would say, though, is for some reason it takes a departure. It takes a wrong turn right here, instead of continuing on the color scheme of the red and the black. Strangely, though, it starts to develop sort of a yellowish coloring, and I don't know if it's maybe just the case that they haven't applied enough paint to it. Maybe it is the coloring of the plastic sort of peeking its way through, but it sort of gives you a very abrupt stop right here, and it's completely a different color than what we're getting to the red and the black that looks really nice here. It leaves a little less to be desired here. You don't see it as much when it comes to the top of the statue's body. I keep wanting to call this guy a figure. But when we look at the top of the statue's body, it's pretty consistent. Right from the end of its snout all the way to the end of its end tail, you can see that really nice use of the red all the way across. But for, again, some reason, it gets kind of more of a yellowish color right here. Not that this is really going to be the part of the figure or statue that you're going to be looking at anyways. Speaking of yellows, one of the things I really also like about Burning Godzilla is the use of the yellow that they did for the spikes. The spikes vary, of course, in sizes. It's kind of weird, like the middle section here, kind of where, well, of course, you got 3 rows of spikes, the tallest being the ones in the middle. But in between all of them, sort of more of a gelatinous, kind of looks like it's slimy to the touch, the way they've actually colored the inside of it. Again, the spikes themselves are kind of more of a softer plastic. Some of the spikes, for example, like this one's a little bit more of a softer plastic, but you can kind of feel that some of the shorter ones are a lot harder of a plastic, and they all get, again, that color scheme of the yellows, the oranges, the reds, and again, a little bit of char of the black there as well. All in all, it's just a great looking statue. I think the one thing that may deter some individuals from probably picking this one up for themselves and adding to the collection is simply just because there is no posability to it. If you were to, again, compare this one to, again, just going to slide this one over and bring in the earlier looked at exquisite basic Godzilla, this one had not only the great pose that this one had, but it also benefited from the fact that it did have posability. And again, I don't think I'm bothered too much by the fact that there's no posability, because again, like if you are wanting to get posable figures, Hiya's doing that as well. Hiya's releasing the exquisite minis that we've looked at, the exquisite minis, I should say. And they've also released the exquisite basics, which would be the Godzilla that we looked at earlier here as well. If you want articulated figures, they're there. They're there. You can pick them up anytime that you want. But this subcategory sort of gives you then the sculpting that Hiya's been delivering all this time, but they're delivering it with statues, not necessarily ones that are going to be posable. The thing about Godzilla, too, is, well, if you aren't a fan of this specific color scheme that they chose with the Burning Godzilla, they did also use this mold for a regular basic Godzilla, too. So if you prefer the color scheme a little bit more closer to this guy, then there is also a Burning series, or non-Burning series, I should say, Stylist series Godzilla that is a lot more closer in the grays and all the more familiar colors that Godzilla is used to usually having. 3 things I look for, the guy behind the camera always looks for when it comes to collecting anything new, is sculpt, is paint, is posability. Well, I've collected enough statues to know that you're not always going to get anything that's posable on a statue. Sometimes you might get the random statue out there that has something moving like a head or an arm, but 9 times out of 10, it's usually a staction piece. So then you, of course, you have sculpting and you have paint. Well, again, I could almost even use the argument. There's a lot of statues I've seen on market that are the grayscales or the black and whites, and those look fantastic. They don't have a lot of colors, but they do deliver at least in the most, what I feel to be the most important category, and that's sculpt. The whole real reason why I do bring up those 3 categories is looking at here, of course, the Burning Godzilla Stylized series. The Stylist series does omit one thing that the Exquisite Basic did do better, and that's being a posable Godzilla. But if you're not one that ever wants to put on this guy on the shelf and go back periodically to move his arm, move his tail, move his head around, what you are getting instead, while lacking posability, you're getting a great sculpted Godzilla, and one that's really well painted. I mean, look at the color scheme that they chose here. Mostly a magma-based color. We got the reds, the dark, kind of charred black areas of his body, and then you got the brightness of the spikes on the back of his body, and the yellows, the oranges, and a little bit of that charred black added in there as well. This Godzilla looks fantastic. And is it all that important that he doesn't have anything that moves on him? I don't think so. If you did want something that posed in the way of a Godzilla from Hiya Toys, then there's always the outlet of going with the Exquisite Basics. If, though, you do want a well-painted statue and one that has a great-looking sculpt, I think there's this one. I mean, obviously, this is the Burning Godzilla. This is the Stylist series exclusive, 2023 exclusive. But if you want just a simpler OG color scheme for Godzilla, there is also a regular version of the Stylist Godzilla 2, still looking like this. Just, of course, making use more of the grays and the darker colors that Godzilla's normally known for having. The only thing I would say, though, as a little side note, when it comes to putting this guy together, I mean, assembly obviously is so very simple on this guy. You simply just take the tail and attach it to the back of his body. Unfortunately, though, it does leave a little bit of a gap space, and you can kind of see where the tail looks like it's a separate piece from the rest of the statue. But other than that, what a great-looking Godzilla this looks like. If you are a fan of the look of the Burning Godzilla, definitely check this guy out. This guy is slated to release again the second quarter of 2023. The price point for many of the online sites that have the pre-order available right now is $49.99. So he's a little shy of being $50. Again, he doesn't have the posability that the Exquisite Basic Godzilla has, but at least he checks the boxes of the other two important categories, sculpting and paint. What do you guys think of Burning Godzilla? Let me know down below in the comment section. And are you into the Stylist series that Hiya Toys are putting out? They've done a Godzilla. They also done, I think, a Leaping King Kong. I'd love to get my hands on that one at some point. But what do you guys think of this line? Let me know down below in the comment section. And really, what do you think is the most important of the three categories? Sculpt, paint, posability. Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, why not throw it a like? Why not? If you guys are also loving the content you guys are seeing and on board to see more, then make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, and that you're also turning on the bell notification. Popping up also at the very end of this video, if you don't mind me plugging a playlist, there will also be a playlist of other Hiya Toys stuff that I've looked at, with all future Hiya Toys showing up in that very same playlist. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.